Hello, everybody. Welcome back if you joined us for this morning's session, and welcome if you're just joining us for the second session of NNClimate22. We've got another great lineup of speakers to take us through to 1 o'clock, and we'll be looking more specifically at sustainability and nature recovery as part of this session. So a quick reminder that you can email in questions as we go to nnClimate22@northants.gov.uk. Those can be toward the speakers and particular things they've picked up on that you'd like to ask about. So to get things started, I will be handing over to Emma Arkley, who's from Northamptonshire Council, and is going to be talking to us about the Ise Valley Strategic Plan. So Emma, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Pentland. Good morning, conference. My name is Emma Arkley. I'm a Senior Development Officer in the Planning Policy team at Northamptonshire Council. I can see Raj has already got my first slide up, so we're already on a winner. Climate change, as our world leaders have been discussing, and you're going to hear throughout the course of today, is here. And it's affecting us globally and nationally and locally as well. And it's affecting us through a variety of different ways, but temperature rises that we're becoming very familiar with are starting to alter our human and our natural systems. And they're bringing these extreme weather events with them. And of course, climate change doesn't cause these extreme weather events, but it simply increases their power and their frequency. And therefore, with that, it's bringing the risks that we can see taking place right in front of us in our Ise Valley at a local level. Risks to the growth and diversity of the valley's habitats and species, both in the water environment and on land. Risks to the health of our soil through increased flooding and droughts. Risks to the natural carbon stores and the sequestration. And of course, risks to our local communities who are being exposed to this impact. And a lot of organisations are talking now about mitigation. It's all about mitigation. But today I want to talk about the other alternative to mitigation that we should really be talking about more loudly, and we should be using in association with mitigation, and that's adaptation. Next slide, please, Raj. So I'm going to introduce you to the Ise Valley Strategic Plan. It's a really large scale and ambitious programme that's going to enhance the quality of the Ise Valley's natural environment, both for people and wildlife. Next slide, please, Raj. It's an innovative and a very effective strategy, which is focusing on bringing people and projects and funding together in an opportunistic and a coordinated way. Really, it's our way for preparing the valley for climate change by increasing its resilience through adaptation. Next slide, please, Raj. And the projects within the plan are seeking to reduce flooding by introducing natural flood management measures, improve water quality through the River Ise, maximise biodiversity net gains throughout the course of the valley, and about creating new green infrastructure while we protect protect and enhance our existing green infrastructure. The development of the plan was led by the Nen Rivers Trust, formerly the RNRP, I think most of you will know who they are, on behalf of and with input from the River Ise Partnership. This partnership, the River Ise Partnership, came together in 2019 through a collective interest in the health and the well-being of the valley. It's a very strong and a very inclusive network of organisations who have the capacity to facilitate partner and community participation in the planning, development, and the united enjoyment of the Ise Valley through project delivery. So I'm going to introduce you now to the Ise Valley Strategic Plan. I got ahead of myself with the slides there. We're actually up to date now. The plan itself is split into 4 parts, and as you can see, like every good plan, it's got a whole raft of appendices that sit behind it. Part 1 is all about scene setting. It's about the River Eyes Partnership and their vision. It provides a review of all the documents that we've looked at, from legislation to plans to programmes, that have informed and influenced the development of the Eyes Valley Strategic Plan. And most importantly, it provides an overview of the plan area. Next slide, please, Raj. And here it is. This is the plan area. It shows the River Eyes and its tributaries. It's sitting within the full river catchment, but it reaches up to Corby as part of the proposed Eyes Valley Greenway, which I'm going to come back to and talk about a little bit later on. The river itself rises up near Naseby. It flows east past Desborough, turns south at Geddington, flows right down through the valley, through Kettering, until it hits the River Nen, or River Nene, depending where you come from in Northamptonshire. Nen for me. So it reaches the River Nen in Wellingborough. And you'll also see that on the map, I've put some sustainable urban extensions and some committed, these sustainable urban extensions and committed sites. The valley itself is sitting within a growth area. And so it's going to come under increasing pressure through demand for recreational opportunities and for the ecosystem services that it provides. It's really important that we think about this now, because we need to start pulling together the mechanisms available to us to protect and enhance and create a connected landscape, not just for now, but for generations to come. Next slide, please, Raj. Part 2 of the plan subdivides the plan area into 3 zones. We really wanted to understand how each individual zone operated on its own and then as part of the whole plan area. So we profiled each individual zone through a combination of desktop study and ground truth walkovers. And that allowed us to establish a baseline for biodiversity, connectivity and access, community health and well-being, landscape, heritage, flooding and water management, and of course, ecosystem services. And we analysed that baseline and we began to look for opportunities where we could create and enhance the resilience of the valley through partnership engagement and project development and delivery. Next slide, please, Raj. And you can imagine there are a load of opportunities where we can start to increase resilience. So, for example, we could be creating partnerships with landowners to deliver natural flood management projects. And we're doing this already with Boughton Estate and Wicksteed Park. We could do some surveys with volunteers looking perhaps for water vole or otters, or maybe even look at it in a different way, invasive species like signal crayfish or mink, so that we can identify opportunities for habitat enhancement or creation, or we can look at ways of changing the habitat so we can try and discourage those little critters that we don't want in our patch. Thanks very much. And we can help people learn and appreciate about their past and their landscape by creating perhaps a heritage trail, or using those cute little QR codes where you can just flash your phone on them and they'll take you back and give you loads of information about how the landscape in the past actually was as compared to how it is today. But in order to unlock these opportunities, we really needed, we needed innovative solutions, inventive solutions. If we're to create that landscape of destinations to encourage leisure, recreation and tourism in a sustainable way. Next slide, please, Raj. Because what we need to do is find a balance between people and wildlife, because it's not just about improving the access to the river. We need to be thinking about how we're going to protect those stretches of the river that are sensitive to disturbance. And we need innovation, perhaps physical modifications to the watercourse itself, where we can reconnect floodplains and reduce the risk of flooding wherever possible. We could see that those projects that we were looking for really needed to increase the valley's resilience to climate change and to mitigate pollution and flood risk and to tackle the threat of non-native species to our flora and fauna. These were all issues that we discovered through our baseline research, and they can be addressed together if we use the implementation chapter of the Eyes Valley Strategic Plan, and that's part 3 of the Eyes Valley Plan. It's all about implementation. Next slide, please, Reg. It is going to be one of our biggest challenges. The partnership don't deny that at all, because like all good ideas, it's very difficult to get them off the ground in the first instance. So there's going to have to be a lot of gumption and a lot of drive and a lot of commitment from the partnership itself, but also from our local communities, our parish councils, our voluntary sector. But we genuinely think this is worth pursuing. The implementation plan, I have to say, is ridiculously comprehensive, so I can't hope to do it justice here today, not in a 15-minute presentation. What I'm going to do is let you have a look at that in your own time. I provided a link at the end of this presentation, so you'll be able to just go and delve in when you can. I would, however, like to just skip to that final strand of the implementation plan, and let's just talk for a moment about projects. Next slide, please, Raj. So when we first got together as a partnership, we started to think, right, what are we going to do? How are we going to improve the resilience, and what sort of projects do we need to be identifying? So we did a bit of a delve into our different documents and our organisations, and we put them on, we rummaged through all of these projects, and we identified 11 projects that we thought were quite feasible and great starters, 4 of which we identified as flagship status. All 4 of those projects, I'm really pleased to say, are underway, different degrees, different phases, but it shows that the partnership are beginning to deliver on their vision through the Ise Valley Strategic Plan. Next slide, please, Raj. So the first one that I wanted to tell you about is the Ise Valley Greenway, which is a really exciting opportunity to connect Wellingborough all the way up to Corby through the Ise Valley by creating new access routes for walking, cycling, wheeling. We've already had the route mapped so that we can guide progress towards project development and to help attract funding, which is always a key aspect, which will ultimately lead to the delivery. We made sure that it connected to the renowned East Northamptonshire Greenway. And really through this project, what we're looking to do is to work towards the next phase in the creation of a North Northamptonshire Greenway. It's a phenomenal project, and it really is going to promote active travel by sustainable means. Next slide, please, Raj. Then there's South Meadows at Wicksteed Park. This is a real trailblazing project. It's innovative, it's impressive. It's led to the realignment of Slade Brook across the meadow, so it reconnects with its natural floodplain. Basically, we're looking to improve the water quality and floodwater management, and it is a feat of hydrological engineering, there's no doubt. It's going to lead to a species-rich habitat through this wetland creation, and improve visitor access, through, not just for leisure, but also for educational purposes, because we want to share what we've been doing down there. Next slide, please, Raj. Boughton Estate is hot on the heels of these 2 former projects. It's a really creative, a very contemporary project. It's going to bring about natural flood management, habitat enhancements, water quality improvements. And through this work, they will see the freedom of movement of fish upstream, possibly for the first time in 300 years on the estate. It's one of a real diverse range of projects on the estate that are combining historic and natural conservation harmoniously within the estate itself. Next slide, please, Raj. And finally, but by no means least, the council have had an appetite to deliver an Ise Valley parkland for some time now. And this is really upping its ambition through the Ise Valley Partnership and the Ise Valley Strategic Plan. To date, tree planting and habitat enhancements have been a really successful focus for the creation of the Ise Valley Parklands. But now we're talking about connecting those natural and semi-natural spaces into a cohesive central park for the Ise Valley. It's about improving accessibility and encouraging movement through the valley, for example, by putting in new bridges so that we can enhance circulation and creating natural play areas, perhaps providing distinctive wayfinding so there's a sense of place, and promoting habitat revival through interpretation. Next slide, please. Thanks, Reg. So all of these projects that I'm talking about now, they've all benefited in terms of the vision, the funding, and the professional expertise and the innovation of the Riverise Partnership. And to date, around £500,000 in funding has been directed to initiatives under the banner of the partnership and the Riverise Strategic Plan. That's the end of the slides. Thanks, Reg. So we intend to continue building the Valley's resilience to climate change through projects like these that will help the Valley adapt to this new horizon that's coming. And we sincerely hope that you'll join us on this journey. My name's Emma Arkley from Northamptonshire Council. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Emma, for taking us through that. Really useful to take a look in some detail about what we're doing locally to try and look after some of our really important natural resources. The Eyes Valley Strategic Partnership is so important and draws on so much of the knowledge that we have locally, which is really important for everybody in the community. So thank you for going through that with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Now going to move and hand over to Tristan Baxter-Smith from the Nen Rivers Trust, who is going to talk to us about providing local solutions with landowners and farmers. So in just a second, once we get the slides all sorted and such likes, we'll hand over.
Walking down this what looks like unkept hedging.
We're not actually ready for the video yet, but
I'm going to talk about exactly how Lens is structured, how it works on the ground. So Lens is a unique type of project in that it's very farmer-led. Right at the start of the chain, you have the growers, the farmers. They have the resources that businesses are looking to fund. So that might be these trees that we're walking past now. It might be cover crops to my left. You then have the supply aggregators. Now the supply aggregators are people like me, a land advisor at the Nen Rivers Trust. We act as the, I suppose, go-between between the Lens funders and the landowners. So part of our responsibility is working with landowners and finding opportunities for the funders to fund. This is one such example we're walking through at the moment. This is a field of cover crop, essentially. If we move the camera down, you can just see here that's vetch, which is a particular mix of clovers that we're putting in. Some of the grasses are coming through, obviously, from the following crop. There's another vetch plant. Now, vetch and clovers have the benefit of storing away their nitrogen in the soil. They secrete the nitrogen back into the soil, and that obviously can then be accessed by following crops, so it's good from a grower's point of view. It's got a spongy quality to the soil, and that's great because, as we know, a sponge absorbs water. So from a flood prevention point of view, the more efficient we can make our soils at storing water, the better we are set up in order to prevent flooding. If we can make our ground healthier and more efficient at locking that water away, we not only lock water away, but we lock things like nitrogen away. We lock pesticides away. So, as a supply aggregator, working for Nen Rivers Trust, my job is to find farmers and landowners who have potential opportunities in which to invest. In this case, this area was an incredibly wet, boggy and pretty useless triangular field, and we'd sort of let it go back to nature, mowed it once in a while, but we really wanted to put some trees in here to basically take away a lot of the moisture. And it's a great example of that linked up sort of ecosystem working. In that, yes, it looks a bit of a mess at this time of year, but normally in a really, really wet year, or after a really, really heavy rain, as we've just experienced, this paddock would be virtually unwalkable. It's that wet. There's a lot of springs that come out down here. But planting these trees means that I can walk here. The trees are taking up the moisture, and this links into flood prevention, because at the end, although you can't see it, at the end of the field in the corner, there is a bridleway which leads straight into the centre of the village. A number of houses frequently used to get flooded. That no longer happens, and hasn't happened in the last 10 years since these trees have become mature. So just having stuff in the soil has been really beneficial, and continues to benefit not only the community, but potentially businesses that are based in this vicinity. And again, that's how Lens works beautifully. It's linking local businesses with local land-based opportunities, such as this woodland. So what do I want to be your take home then? What do I want you to take away from this video? Just how Lens operates, I suppose. And that is farmers providing opportunities for businesses to invest locally in biodiversity, in flood mitigation, in measures that not only benefit the local communities, local businesses, but also the environment at large.
Okay, hi all. I hope you can hear me. And yep, I was meant to introduce that video, but sorry about that. You've seen it now anyway. So a summary then of Lens and what it is, what it means. I hope you've got a bit of information from that video. That video sort of explains some of the measures that can be put in place using Lens. But essentially, Lens, it brings together businesses with diverse needs to invest in common nature-based solutions that make a real difference to the nature and landscape. It's a new but proven system with millions of pounds worth of live transactions, which are set to repeat and grow in the most advanced trading locations across the UK. So currently, Lens obviously is working well in the East Midlands. We're just about to enter a new trade, which is a sort of window of opportunities for businesses to invest in these systems across their given jurisdiction. Lens is also in operation in Europe as well. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so it's the basic principles then. So it's demand-led. So Lens constructs trading opportunities based on the needs of potential buyers. So for example, Nestle, one of the large investors, they may have an interest in carbon uptake, which obviously we know cover crops can influence that in a positive way, tree planting. They may wish to invest in those sort of measures. Anglian Water, another large investor through Lens, their interest may lie in things like clean water and flood mitigation. So again, that may be something they wish to invest in. It's multifunctional, so Lens finds and funds nature-based solutions that deliver multiple benefits. So the beauty of it is that you can have one landowner or one area of ground that has a multitude of measures within it. So in that video, you saw the cover cropping. Well, you might have hedge planting next to that. You may have some tree planting. You may have some flood mitigation if there is a need for it in the area, all within one parcel of land and all within one, essentially one project. So the farmer submits this project, and through help from me and other supply aggregators, they come up with a figure which is going to be able to deliver the project at a cost. and that's submitted to the lens funders. So it's a little bit like a reverse auction, I suppose. That brings us on to point 3. It's a collaborative process. Lens builds a consortia of buyers sharing costs to make solutions cost effective, and the consortia of land managers delivering outcomes at a landscape scale. So again, it's a really flexible and adaptable approach. And as a farmer myself, I find it really rewarding to be delivering this, because we've, for so long, farmers have been sort of at the mercy of whichever government stewardship scheme we get handed out, and they're often quite restrictive in what you can do. And the thing about farming is it doesn't work well with the restrictions. It's a very fluid sort of business. It's not like a normal business. You plan years in advance, but often, as we've discovered, climate change and the weather changes your plan. So you need to be able to adapt to that. So Lens gives the farmer the opportunity to really plan their business going forward, and to plan in for these climate change problems, and also map in those solutions, I suppose, going forward. So point 4, it's business-like. Lens trades are business-to-business transactions with contracts based on negotiated prices and not predetermined rates, which is really, really rewarding for the landowner, because, again, as a farmer, we often get stewardship schemes come up, and these are obviously presented to us through the Rural Payments Association, RPA, and DEFRA. They're often based on a sort of a payment rate per hectare. Now, the problem with that is, at the moment, obviously, we have an economy where prices, the costs of things, are going up and down all the time, mostly up, as we all know. And as a farmer, that's really difficult to work with, because if you're applying for a stewardship scheme, you might say, okay, I want to put in a new gravel driveway to allow my heavy machinery access into fields without creating surface runoff, without destroying soil, creating compaction, all that kind of thing. Okay, so that's what you want to achieve, right? Fine. The government will pay you X amount of pounds per hectare to achieve that. In the meantime, sort of 3 years down the line, by the time your scheme has come into fruition and you're ready to go, the price of aggregate has soared up. The price of labour has gone up, which means that scheme that you said you could afford 3 years ago, you no longer can afford. The beauty of Lens is that we work with the farmers. I work with the farmer. We sit down and go, okay, what's the cost of aggregate at the moment? You're going to be required to deliver this in a year's time. So we'll factor that in. How much do you think how many hours is it going to take to create this? We factor that into the price of the measure, and that's presented to the Lens funders. So it's a realistic price. So the farmer is not going to be out of pocket, which is a benefit to him. So point 5, organic growth. Lens trades they start small, focusing on creating stable, common interest transactions and building complexity and scale by adding new trades over time. So when Lens begins to operate in a given area, so for example, we're operating in Northamptonshire. Now, we had our first trade last year. Trade is just the term we use for the funding window that farmers can apply in. So that was Trade 22. Trade 22 was sort of the first foot on the ladder, if you like, to spreading out across Northamptonshire. And we've got a really diverse range of partners, not just farmers, but also parish councils, anyone that owns land that wanted to achieve something that would give benefit to the community. Point 6 then, it's place-based. Okay, and that's really, really important. Lens is rooted in the particularities of a place. So that could be the particular type of soil, ecology, farming practices, culture. All of these things vary hugely across the country. And Lens, I suppose, takes that into account, because it's based on what the farmer in that given area wants to deliver, and not what the large-scale stewardship scheme wishes to deliver nationwide. Being built at regional scale, and ultimately owned and run by the businesses in those regions. So the businesses, no matter how local, Nestle, obviously a huge business, Anglian Water, covers a more focused jurisdiction, so they can be more assured that their needs, their sort of corporate responsibility from an environmental point of view is met on a local level. And that's it really. Thank you very much. I will just say that the highlights of Lens Trade 22, which was the last year's one, a total of £2.28 million traded, which goes to some way to show how successful last year's been. We're hoping to obviously increase that, and circa of 10,000 hectares of land improved. So, really, really, really impressive. And that's across the East Midlands. 64 different farmers taking part, 28 different measures funded, most popular of which being cover crops, reduced cultivation, hedge planting. So yeah, we're hoping to go good guns for Lens 23, and I hope that's sort of gone some way to explaining what it is. And if there are any questions, obviously add them to the end and I'm happy to answer them, or just get in touch with me at Nen Rivers Trust. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for going through that. Farming is really important for the community, locally and nationally as well. And so it was really useful to get that insight into this particular project, and actually some of the simple measures alongside the more complex ones that can be taken and have really kind of quite profound effects, as you mentioned in the video, in terms of flooding prevention. So thanks again very much for going through that, and I'm sure there'll be some questions stimulated from that one. So we're going to move on to our next speaker now, which is Claire Barrett from Natural England, and she's going to talk to us a bit about local nature recovery strategies, which I mentioned in our first session, and are going to be really important moving forward. So Claire, over to you.
Thank you everyone. As Councillor Pentland has outlined, my presentation today is on the local nature recovery strategies, just giving you a brief introduction to what they're about and how you can get involved. So as the first slide mentions, the local nature recovery strategies themselves are a new system of sort of spatial strategies for nature recovery, and the broad reason for them is that they will be used to underpin the delivery of nature recovery network. So in essence, it will build a shared vision for nature recovery for our area, such as Northamptonshire. And the strategy itself will have sort of three broad aims to it. It will agree priorities for nature recovery across Northamptonshire. It will map the most valuable existing areas for nature. And finally, it will map the opportunities for creating or improving nature, and really importantly, sort of wider environmental benefits to counter the effects of climate change, like we've heard from other speakers today. So that could be flood management, carbon sequestration, or the people's access to nature locally, and how they can get close to their local sort of green space. And from hearing from sort of other speakers this morning, you might be thinking, we've already done a lot of this work already. We already have biodiversity action plan targets, priorities. We have some great mapping work across the Northamptonshire area for our natural capital targets. And just Emma and Tristan's presentations a moment ago talking about the great work they've been doing on the ground. And I think what's really important about local nature recovery strategies is it's not reinventing the wheel. It's using all of these great projects, these great plans and strategies, and looking across the area. Most importantly, the difference will be to look to create that shared vision across different communities, across different organisations that all want to combat the challenges of climate change and the impact it's having on our sort of nature-rich spaces. So really, it's a really locally led collaborative tool to bring everybody together to agree on what those priorities are and where those opportunities might be across the patch, with the aim to ensuring a bigger, better, more connected, wildlife-rich places across Northamptonshire. Next slide, please. So where did all this come from? As many of you might already be aware, the local nature recovery strategies are part of the Environment Act that was passed last year. And this new tool is a statutory requirement of responsible authorities. And for North Northamptonshire, that's obviously the North Northamptonshire Council, for creating, they're going to be responsible for creating this strategy. However, as I mentioned earlier, I can't stress enough that these targets are something we all need to meet, and it's that real collaborative, locally led approach and the community engagement that's really important key aspect of creating this strategy. Next slide, please. And they don't stand alone. There's lots of tools that have been built into the Environment Act to really help us achieve those environmental targets. So you've got things like the LNRSs and other strategies for protected sites and species conservation and conservation covenants. And then most closely tied into the local nature recovery strategies is the biodiversity net gain, or BNG, as we abbreviate it to. And the fact that that's going to be made mandatory at 10% biodiversity net gain this time next year. And so the link with the biodiversity net gain work and where those credits and those units can be applied really links quite closely to the local nature recovery strategies, because through the strategy that we create, we'll be able to identify where those opportunities might be for biodiversity net gain units. I haven't got time to go into biodiversity net gain in much more detail today, but if you want to know more information, please get in touch, and I can speak to my colleagues and provide further information on that. Next slide, please. So just taking it all a step back further, really, in terms of the Environment Act and the government's 25-year environment plan, this has all been brought about by the Lawton Principle, which is sort of described on this slide here. And that's to help achieve this nature recovery network. For so long, we've looked at really important sites, be they sites of special scientific interest and special protection areas, of being a real core priority sort of habitat for different species. But through that Lawton Principle, it was really realised that we need to connect up these priority habitats. We need to expand and restore particular areas and offer those corridors and stepping stones for nature to move around across our area. And the strategies themselves will really help to map how that can start to happen and really help to underpin that nature recovery network across the North Northamptonshire area. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, local nature recovery strategies, what will they look like? Well, there's been a lot of pilot work that's already taken place across other areas. So Cornwall was one of the pilots that took place and created a really good, really user-friendly strategy that anybody could pick up and understand. And so from those pilots, we're currently waiting, as I'll come on to, the regulations and guidance for how we can create a strategy for North Northamptonshire. But the basic principles is they're made up of two core elements of each strategy. So the first is this statement of biodiversity priorities. And this will make up both the description of the North Northamptonshire area and its biodiversity, but also a description of the opportunities and priorities for recovering or enhancing biodiversity across that area. And if you can move it on, please, Raj. And then the second part is the local habitat map. So this is looking to identify national conservation sites, such as sites of special scientific interest, SSSIs, or special protection areas, SPAs, such as the one we have in North Northamptonshire for the Nene Valley. It will also identify local nature reserves and other areas which might be of particular importance for biodiversity, such as local wildlife sites. And then probably most importantly, it will also map where the areas which could become of particular importance for biodiversity, or where the recovery or enhancement of biodiversity could make a particular contribution to other environmental benefits, such as flood management or carbon sequestration, or like I said, that people and nature, that access element to bring well-being for residents and people who live and work in North Northamptonshire. Next slide, please. So how will they be produced? As I said earlier, North Northamptonshire Council is the responsible authority provisionally that's been put in place to deliver the LNRS for our area. And they're not alone. So each LNRS will be mapped across the whole of the country. So in total, I believe there's going to be 48 LNRSs across England with no gaps and no overlaps. And as I said, we're currently waiting, as the second point on here, we're waiting for the statutory regulations and guidance to come through from DEFRA on exactly what that process needs to look like to help us create that strategy. Also, as I mentioned earlier, it's really important that we build on what's gone before, that integration with all the existing plans, projects, policies that other organisations have already created. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's use all of that good work and build that into the strategy that we hope to create. And particularly that sort of wider stakeholder engagement is just such a key aspect of the LNRS. We really want to hear those views and opinions of local communities, local stakeholders, local landowners, you know, about what they want to do on their land, what they would like to see happen, and really build that into a collaborative strategy going forward with the involvement of other agencies across DEFRA, be that ourselves as Natural England, the Environment Agency or Forestry Commission, all the other good local groups that are operating and have a stake in the environment for our patch. So it could be wildlife trusts, obviously the council themselves, and also Southern End Rivers Trust as well. Next slide, please. So I suppose, as I said earlier, you know, the local nature recovery strategy for North Northamptonshire will provide that shared vision for nature recovery across all of the Northants area. So I just wanted to put this slide in really to emphasise the fact that it includes our parklands, our waterways such as the Nene or Nen, our woodlands and tree planting and tree management, and also natural spaces in and around farmlands. And some of the work that Tristan was mentioning earlier through the Lens project is a really good example of that, where we need to balance the needs of food production and nature recovery. And so opportunities where we can do that hand in hand and achieve that balance is really important. So the strategy really hopes to identify those particular opportunities. If you can move it on, please, Raj. So it really is that tool to help us and enable us to make those positive choices in the future around what happens in Northamptonshire that can benefit both people and, most importantly, the environment too. Next slide, please. So obviously I've spoken quite a lot there around the strategy and what the strategy is about. And I'm all up for strategy, but obviously it's really important that we actually then go on to deliver that strategy. I feel like we would have failed if we agreed the shared vision and then don't actually have the tools and the opportunities to deliver it. So again, I just wanted to put this slide in to look at how we might be able to deliver some aspects of that strategy. So biodiversity net gain is a good one that I've already mentioned, but there's lots of other opportunities out there. The future environmental land management scheme, ELMS, and what that might look like and how that could play its part is obviously really integral to delivering the strategy. But there's loads of other pots of funding out there too. So there's the Flood Resilience Fund, there's tree planting and woodland creation grants that we could tap into, and the wider Nature for Climate funds as well. And then that sort of new area of funding that's really coming on board around green finance and more sort of commercial investments that really help us might achieve nature recovery at a bigger scale. So that could include things like carbon credits, for example. Next slide, please. So it's really important that, you know, this strategy needs to be all-encompassing and have that shared vision, but it's also important to realise what the LNRSs aren't. So they're not delivery plans, sadly, but that's not to say that we can't build a delivery plan into the strategy or it would be an annex of the strategy. A bit like Emma was saying earlier with the River Eyes and the Eyes Valley strategic plan, that's exactly what they've done, and we could follow that model for the whole of North Northamptonshire. So move on, please, Raj. They're not red lines on a map, and I think that's really important to stress that this is looking at opportunities, and that doesn't mean to say that we can deliver them all or that things might change in the future. That means those opportunities might move and flex and bend. So the refreshing of the strategy on a regular basis is going to be really important for making sure that we're seeking the best opportunities at the right time. Move on, please, Raj. doesn't prevent other land uses. You know, we know that land is a precious commodity across the country, and so again, it's looking at how nature recovery can work hand in hand with other land uses such as food and farming, and other commercial and land and house building projects. You know, we need to find that balance and work together to achieve that sort of shared vision of what that balance looks like. Next slide, please. Oh, finally, yeah, just, you know, that roundabout sort of looking at sort of granting permissions, you know, all the existing statutory permissions still exist, you know, so there's still appreciation and understanding of having to go through planning permission for any particular projects or managing historical sites. You know, we still have to jump through those hoops. You know, it doesn't cut across any of those other statutory permissions. Move on, please. And probably, you know, frustratingly, but it is the case, they're non-binding. You know, the statutory part of the LNRS is that we have to create it. How we go about delivering it is another matter. So they are non-binding in that way, but we're hoping that through that shared vision and shared energy, we can really create that impetus to make the nature recovery happen and deliver that on the ground. Next slide, please. So just a bit about Natural England's role, and I suppose my role as Senior Advisor for the LNRSs across Northamptonshire. My role is really there to provide that sort of focus and support to the responsible authority as Northamptonshire, to ensure that we're following and implementing the regs and guidance, and really ensuring that local collaborative approach, both with stakeholders, community groups, but also landowners too, and bringing everybody on board to ensure that we can collectively move forward together. And finally, around sort of encouraging links up and joining up with neighbouring areas such as West Northamptonshire, which will also have their own separate local nature recovery strategy, and to those areas to the north of us in terms of Leicestershire and Rutland, and those other sort of surrounding counties. It's really important. Biodiversity and nature, they don't work on the boundaries that we work on. So it's extremely important that we have that join up and that connectivity with those surrounding areas so that we can plan and prioritise in a way that's going to link up across the wider patch. Next slide, please. So finally, I suppose if I haven't emphasised enough during those few slides, what's really important here is that we have that collaborative approach. And for anyone listening, you know, whether you're living or working in Northamptonshire and you've got a passion for nature recovery and getting involved in this particular element of the strategy and that creation of the strategy, please get in touch. You know, we want more people to come involved, and the more the better, all those different views. This is your opportunity to come along to the party with that open collaborative approach to really create this shared vision, because we all need to play our part in making nature recovery happen for both people and for nature. Next slide, please. And that's it from me. So happy to answer any questions at the end. Obviously, my contact details up there. So if you do want to get in touch separately after today, then please feel free to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, for going through that with us. It was really informative when you see the acronym LNRS written down and then you get the full wording of it. You might be thinking, well, what on earth is that? What does that actually mean on the ground? So that was really useful to go through that. I'm really optimistic about what we can do with the local nature recovery strategies locally. And as you said, collaboration will be really important as part of that. So thank you once again for going through that. We're now going to move to next speaker, which is Kate Chadwick from the Rockingham Forest Trust, who's going to talk to us about Stannick Lakes and creating a more compassionate and sustainable tourism model. So Kate, over to you.
Thanks, Harriet. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kate Chadwick and I'm the Director of Rockingham Forest Trust, which is the charity that manages Stannick Lakes in East Northants. And we're a SSSI nature reserve that many of you, I'm sure, have visited in the past. I'm going to talk a little bit today about how we as an organisation are working to build a more environmentally and culturally sustainable economic model. And I've only been with the Trust for around 11 months. But over the summer season particularly, I've been able to see how the visitor experience that we need to create here in order to generate our income can impact quite heavily on the environmental health of the site and also the local area. And as an organisation, we are thinking about how to balance the needs of, to provide a tourism offer here in the county against the needs of the local environment, not only on our site, but in the wider area. And I think, as Nick Bolton said in the previous panel discussion, I think small changes make a big difference. And one of the themes running through these talks today, so just, we can talk about changing, climate change and the impact of it, but unless we all make small changes, we're never going to sort of achieve bigger results. So if we can move to slide 2, Raj. So we're in the process of setting a business plan for the next 3 years, and as a team, quite obviously, really, we've taken our starting point as the primary charitable objectives of the trust, and I put them up here so that you can see this is what the charity was set up to do. This is what we strive to achieve. It's the preservation of our SSI site. It's the development and sharing of and enjoyment of the wildlife and habitats here. Working with communities, educating people about everything that exists here. And also we have a role to explore and celebrate the human heritage of the site and of the wider Nene Valley. So we have that as our remit, but in order to do those things, we have to generate income. And we run the site predominantly as a social enterprise, and we derive over 80% of our annual turnover from car parking, catering, private hire, and other public activities, courses and events. And this equates to around £900,000 a year. And it's finding the way to manage those ice cream sales and the waste that is created across the site while protecting our special places. If we can go to the next slide, please. So I think we all understand the pressure on an organisation to generate income and be profitable. And we could easily, I think, in our sort of fight to be a successful tourist destination and to grow our visitor numbers, we could take the sort of buy it cheap, pilot high model of operation. But as a board of trustees and an executive team, in thinking about the future, particularly in the context of global economic recession, energy crisis, and the growing call to action to address climate change, we have chosen, as far as we possibly can, to work to an operating model that ensures that the wildlife, environment and cultural heritage we seek to protect and champion prospers alongside the organisation's need to grow footfall, increase per capita income, and provide employment opportunities for people. So I think essentially what we're trying to do is take all our stakeholders into account when we look at our business model, rather than just looking at how do we make enough money to run this organisation and we don't really care how we do it. It's really important to us that the recreational activities that we offer not only achieve economic success, but also ensure that the wildlife here thrives and that we have as little negative impact on the environment as possible. So next slide, please. So how are we going to do this? I think as an organisation, in some respects, we're at the beginning of a journey. And the first thing that we're going to do in our 3-year plan is carry out a sustainability audit and benchmark our baseline position, particularly in relation to our carbon footprint. And we are going to do this across each area of activity on the site. And you can see we're looking at transport, that's how visitors get to us, but also how our staff travel to the site and around the site. The sort of visitor activities and facilities that we run, our food offer, where we buy our goods from, and also how we manage services across the site and who we work with in order to do that. We've also made a firm commitment to promote and enhance the natural and cultural heritage of the site, and as far as possible improve the quality of life of local people. And we're going to do that through a consideration of our employment practices, the types of programs and activities that we run, how we manage our waste, the supply chains that we use, and how we work with stakeholders, partners and other organisations in the Neem Valley and the wider county to ensure that we have as big an impact as possible in terms of positive action. And so we're in the process now of writing an action plan for the next 2 to 3 years, and we will set targets across all these areas and then evaluate our progress on a regular basis. But as a site, we've already taken a number of steps towards these goals, and I thought I would just share a few of these with you. If we can move to the next slide. So here are a selection of examples of things that we are already doing and thinking about in order to be a more sustainable organisation. So our visitor centre, it already has a number of green technologies, including solar panels that heat our water and provide our underfloor heating. And we draw on lake water to flush our toilets and provide grey water in various parts of the site. The front of the visitor centre, which you can't see in that picture, also has a living roof, which both insulates and creates habitats for insects. And hopefully within the next couple of months, we are going to install electric car charging points, which will enable visitors to fill up with juice while they're on our site. Another big area for us is how we recycle, particularly natural materials on the site and food waste. We were very lucky recently to receive a grant that enabled us to buy a composter and a wood chipper. And both of these, I think, have enabled us to increase our resource efficiency. So the wood chipper, many of you know, well, maybe you don't know, we spend a lot of time cutting down willow and other vegetation in order to manage the site appropriately for our woodland birds. And in the past, we have burnt large amounts of wood, which isn't, doesn't look good for our visitors when their playgrounds covered in ash and smoke. So where possible, we are chipping the wood and we're using that as mulch in various parts of the site and also in our heritage gardens. Food scraps account for 25% of our sort of food waste here in our cafe, and using the composter means instead of paying to throw away food, we're turning it into compost, which is then used liberally across the site. And actually, the heritage gardens that you can see here in the pictures provide, to a small extent, produce that we can use in our cafe. And I can highly recommend my chef's apple and cinnamon cake with apples from our heritage orchard. I think another large sort of big area of it that's important to us is how we invest in local people. We are building the number of local tradespeople that we work with who can support the management of the site. And this includes a local farmer, our cleaners are local, we use cymakers from Five Wells prison and various electricians and plumbers from the local area. And really importantly, our workforce is predominantly from the local area. I think only 2 members of the team out of a team of around 30 live outside the county, and the vast majority of people live within a 5 to 10 mile radius of the site. Lastly, I think the majority of our public programmes use the expertise of our staff and volunteers. They use materials from the sites, and we always seek to encourage and involve the public in gaining a greater understanding of the park's flora and fauna, the importance of protecting local spaces, and also celebrating local heritage and traditional crafts. And these things include the team here that you can see came from a company and spent the day with us, and they helped us build a better recycling solution. They built us a bin, but they were very pleased with themselves by the end of the day. And so I think I've covered everything that I have here. I just moved to the last slide, Raj. If any of you would like to come and see us in flesh and talk to us about the work that we're doing, or if anyone has ideas about how we can make improvements, I'd be delighted to meet you and have a conversation. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Kate, for going through that. Stanwick Lakes is a great local attraction, and loads of people go there all the time, I myself included. Enjoy running through there and walking the dog, etc. And it's really useful to get an insight into what you're doing as an organisation to try and be more sustainable and make sure that these kinds of attractions have a good balance between what they're doing and looking after the environment, which I think it's clear from that presentation you've got a very keen eye on what you're doing there. So that is great. Now going to move on to our last speaker for this session, which is going to be from Oliver Burke from the Nen Park Trust. Just a quick reminder, if you've joined us in the interim watching this, you can email in questions for the speakers we've heard from to NNClimate22 at northants.gov.uk. So handing over to Oliver, who's going to talk to us about nature recovery in a changing climate.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Hopefully everyone can hear me. My name's Oliver Burke. I'm the chair of Northamptonshire's Local Nature Partnership. I'm also head of operations for Nen Park Trust, who run the big country park on the edge of Peterborough at the very end of the Nen Valley. I know you've heard a lot of inspirational talks already this morning, which have been really interesting for me to listen to, but I wanted to talk about the important role that nature plays in climate change. Not just that, but the importance nature also plays with respect to economic prosperity and the health and well-being of local people. Next slide, please. So what is a nature partnership? For those of you that don't know, well, a nature partnerships came into being about 2013, and we were the next logical step from groups of people coming together around the biodiversity action planning process, with the idea of bringing together a coalition of local organisations, businesses and people who wanted to improve their local natural environment. They're the nature-based sibling, perhaps, to the local enterprise partnerships, whose focus is very much around economic growth. And our nature partnership is made up of a range of local organisations from the 2 unitary authorities, DEFRA bodies such as Natural England, businesses such as Anglian Water, and local third sector organisations. We very much see ourselves as the green glue, where nature underpins both the health of local society and economy, but also our local climate. Nature partnerships are very much seen now as the go-to partnership to help the government to deliver on its 25-year environment plan objectives at the local level. And you will have heard about the local nature recovery plan process that Claire was touching on earlier, and the local nature partnerships are considered as one of the key groups of stakeholders who will support the development and delivery of these strategies. The Northamptonshire Local Nature Partnership has a fantastic track record in delivering innovative and exciting nature-based projects across Northamptonshire, and many of those have a direct impact on our ability to adapt and mitigate the impacts of climate change. Next slide, please. I was looking back over some of the climate stats over the last few years, and they're pretty frightening statistics. As many of you know, this year has been a classic example with the hottest summer across Europe for the last 500 years, whilst other parts of the world have seen some of the highest rainfall events ever recorded. Sydney in Australia being a great example of that. My brother lives in Sydney and says it's been raining incessantly for the last 2 months. I look out the window now and it's doing exactly the same. And when it's not raining, large parts of the city are on fire. So it's really bearing the brunt of climate impact. It's starkly clear, though, that climate is changing, and it's changing more rapidly than we had ever predicted as we edge closer to a potential tipping point beyond which we may struggle to return. And yet, despite this, having the most concrete evidence ever that this is the case, we're still predicted in 2022 to have the highest levels of carbon dioxide emissions globally ever recorded. Next slide, please. And these impacts aren't just felt in faraway places. As many of you know, they're felt on our doorstep, and Northamptonshire has had its fair share of challenges relating to this, especially in relation to flash flooding and surface water runoff, as well as flooding more widely, with the River Nen and its catchment running right through the heart of the county. Next slide, please. And this billboard from the Climate Summit in Glasgow, I think, says it perfectly for me. We can become very preoccupied on engineering solutions to solve our climate challenges, and these obviously play a clear role, especially in relation to things like renewable technologies, which harness the services that nature provides us, like wind and solar. But it's more than that. Nature underpins global climate, it regulates it, it impacts where and when rain falls, it impacts air quality and carbon sequestration, indeed the release of carbon from things such as soil degradation, some of which Tristan talked about earlier. Next slide, please. This is a satellite image of the UK during one of the big flood events that the UK had a few years ago, and from this you can see plumes of soil lost out to sea, a result of poor land management and protection of soils. In the UK, almost 4 million hectares of soil are at risk of compaction, over 2 million hectares of soil at risk of erosion, and intensive agriculture has caused arable soils to lose about 40 to 60% of their organic carbon. And if you think UK soils currently store about 10 billion tonnes of carbon, which is roughly equal to 80 years of annual UK greenhouse gas emissions, that's a huge amount to potentially be lost. It's crazy to think for such a critical component of our ability to grow food and feed ourselves, we're only just beginning to realise the importance of good soil ecology, not just in terms of growing nutritious food, but also in terms of lowering our dependence on artificial petrochemical fertilisers, as well as the ability for well-functioning soils to lock in carbon. Next slide, please. We're starting to better understand and acknowledge this, but we still have a long way to go. On the scale of issues that we as humanity are facing, I would argue the threat to biodiversity and complex ecological processes which underpin how our planet functions are the biggest threat to our survival as a species, the health of the planet and its climate. Next slide, please. In recent years, we've started to identify the critical services, those ecosystem services which nature provides us, from the impact a green and pleasant environment thriving with wildlife can have on our mental health and well-being, to the role insects play in pollinating our food crops and ecological functioning catchments play in protecting our towns and cities from flooding. Next slide, please. Just like economic growth is measured in terms of GDP, the services nature provides society, many of which underpin this economic prosperity, are now also being valued. A great example is the role nature and outdoor environment play in people's health. And no better time was this exemplified during lockdown, when local green spaces have played a critical lifeline for local people. The latest data shows the value of health benefits associated with outdoor recreation in the UK was estimated to be between 6.2 and 8.4 billion in 2020. It is being recognised, however, that in delivering these fantastic services, nature and natural capital needs to be in good health, and it needs to be looked after. This means that those businesses and society at large who benefit from this natural capital must all help invest in its future, whether that's monetarily or through other resources, such as people's time. Whether that's a water company benefiting from the water purifying benefits of a well-functioning catchment, or a member of the public visiting a well-managed country park, just like Stannick Lakes, paying for the car parking in return for the health and well-being benefits that space provides. Historically, we have made the assumption that these services come for free, and as a result, the decline in biodiversity has been huge. Next slide, please. And unfortunately, in Northamptonshire, we've seen some of the biggest declines in nature and wildlife for any county in the UK. These are the range of local wildlife sites and sites protected by law for nature. It doesn't look too bad. Next slide, please. But actually, as a proportion of the overall area of the county, it only forms about just over 12%, which is protected in some way for the wildlife it supports. Next slide, please. As a result, Northamptonshire sits fourth from bottom in the league of least amount of land protected by law for nature in a country with with huge growth, increased population and urbanisation, intensive agriculture. Nature has been degraded and left in a very fragmented and isolated state. Next slide, please. We, however, are realising the role that nature-based solutions can have in helping us both adapt and mitigate to the impacts of a changing climate. And thankfully, through the work of the Local Nature Partnership, we've proven real trailblazers in this field, starting to make up for the dire track record we've had historically within the county. This is including pioneering work mapping the natural capital and valuing of ecosystem services across the county, a project which started off with our partnership working in the Neem Valley with the University of Northampton, and which will underpin our emerging local nature recovery strategy and is being used by things like the Local Enterprise Partnership as part of their economic vision for the Oxfords to Cambridgeshire arm. Next slide, please. Is this work which also helps underpin our payments for ecosystem services project, like the Lens project that Tristan was talking about earlier. It also allows us to work with local landowners to identify land that can be better managed for wildlife, linking to things like the new agricultural subsidies, where there is now a focus on the spending of public money to deliver wider environmental benefits to society in addition to food. Next slide, please. Another programme delivered by our partners, the Wildlife Trusts, is the Neemscape Farming for the Future initiative, where we're starting to see real impact on the ground, helping transform an intensively managed, largely arable landscape into a patchwork of wildlife-rich areas, helping make our fragmented nature sites bigger, better, and more joined up. Next slide, please. The work of the Nature Partnership to ensure planning and growth properly recognises the importance of biodiversity means that we've developed some really progressive planning policies locally, led by people like Andra Stopforth within the North Northamptonshire Council. A great example being the SPA mitigation strategy, where development within a certain distance of the Upper Neem Valley Gravel Pit Special Protection Area, a site of European importance for the wildlife that can be found there, helps pay for its long-term management and protection. And places like the emerging Fesham Garden Village has used a Local Nature Partnership developed approach to measuring natural capital and ecosystem services to create a garden village which will deliver significantly more ecosystem services than that which was there before the development took place. Next slide, please. The Resilient Rivers programme has been another fantastic piece of work led by our Local Nature Partnership partners, the Neem Rivers Trust. This fantastic project has looked for opportunities to renaturalise and restore a range of the river's backwaters and back channels, reconnecting the river and its floodplain, decreasing soil erosion, improving water quality and slowing the flows. From this, the project has restored over 5 kilometres of riverbank and engaged over 50 landowners in the process. And for me, the most striking example of this is the work at the waterside in Wellingborough, which is sections, as you can see in this picture here, which are pretty stark and nature poor. Next slide, please. By putting in floating coir rafts, we've planted up with aquatic plant species. Next slide, please. You can see how thriving ecosystems have been developed. greatly improving the aesthetics of this area for local people and creating fantastic spaces for wildlife. Next slide, please. Can you click on the video? Will it play for us? It will. Brilliant. There we go. And what fascinates me is not just the ecosystems that exist above the waterline, but also below it as well, where the plant's root systems form an important refuge for fish and invertebrates, but also play a very important role in improving water quality. Next slide, please. Rewilding seems to be the buzzword of the moment. I hear a lot about it in newspapers and people get very excited about it when we talk about things like beavers. If you've seen the fantastic work they've been doing down on the Knepp estate in Sussex, you can see the positive impact that allowing nature to be nature can have. But although this has inspired other large estates to follow their lead, it's rare in the UK to have a 3,500 acre block of land in a single ownership at your disposal to do what they've done. For me, rewilding is about the small things, which we've already talked about today, as well as the big things that can make spaces feel wider, wilder and more nature rich, and how we can join up those across the landscape. By working in partnership to deliver these projects with businesses, with local landowners, and of course, the local community, we can really start to build a greater awareness and understanding of the role nature plays in all of our lives and why we need to protect and enhance it. Doing this not only is the most cost-effective way of helping mitigate and adapt to climate change, but it's the most critical piece of our climate change jigsaw, preventing us reaching that typical tipping point and a potential climate Armageddon. Thank you. Next slide.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Oliver, for going through that. I think it provides some, the quite stark information about what happens if we don't act in the right ways, but also the opportunities that we've got there. And that's really important that we seize on those. That little video was really interesting, actually, to see what is under the water that you don't always see, and just shows the other side of the biodiversity that we've got there. So thank you again.
Thank you.
So that concludes all the speakers for this session. Thank you very much for taking us through that. I think the presentations that you gave all tie together really well, and some of the key themes I picked up from all of them were the importance of collaboration, which is vital to getting this right. Now going to move on to the questions that have been submitted over the course of that session. So I will hand over to George Candler now, who is the Executive Director for Place and Economy at NNC.
Thank you, Councillor Pentland. Good afternoon, everyone. As Councillor Pentland said, my name is George Candler, Executive Director for Place and Economy. And I've got the lovely position of posing a few questions that have come in through viewers on the YouTube channel, and also those that have come in through our email inbox, dedicated email inbox. As I mentioned at the first session, we won't be able to cover every single question that's come in, but what I am doing is taking a selection of those to pose shortly. Those that we can't cover, we will answer. We'll be leaning on our guest speakers here this morning to help answer those. And then we'll post them up on the climate change dedicated page that we've got on our website. So I think what struck me with those 5 very varied and different presentations, I think what was written through all of them was partnership, and partnership working is sort of the bedrock, the DNA of ensuring success with such a broad range of activity, and certainly understanding what is going on across Northamptonshire is incredibly impressive and inspiring, actually, in terms of what we're seeing. But moving on to the questions, one of the first questions I'm going to pose to everyone, actually. What was said was a fantastic range of presentations showing and demonstrating all that Northamptonshire has to offer, and already undertaking so many projects in the area. But a general question for everyone is, if there is one thing that you think we should be doing more or better to get some real tangible benefits for meeting the challenges of climate change, and how best we can succeed in doing this, what would that be? So just one thing, and we'll sort of go round. I'll bring each of the speakers in, if I may. So we'll go in reverse order. So we'll go with yourself first, Oliver.
Oh, I was hoping you weren't going to say that. Right, okay. I think it would be for everyone that's watching the sessions today, and for communities, businesses, whoever you are, to take one small step, whether that's in your garden, whether that's just through the way that you carry out your lifestyle in a more sustainable way, because I think it really is those small differences that we all take that actually, when they are aggregated together, have a huge impact. And sometimes we worry that they won't, and therefore we don't do it. Yeah, that will be my thought on that.
Thanks, Oliver. We'll go to Emma next.
Oliver stole the one that we all would have gone with. In the absence of being able to repeat Oliver, I think for me, it's about project planning. It's about getting oven-ready project plans that are costed, so that when funding streams come available, you can really capitalise on them. Because quite often funding comes up and everyone goes, yay, there's all this funding, and nobody's got the capacity all the time to make a project plan. So one of the things that the Eyes Valley strategic plan was about getting some oven-ready projects, and then being in a position to take forward funding and then work in partnership with our local communities to start developing more projects to bring on as and when projects are being delivered. So I think for me, oven-ready project plans that are costed.
Great, thanks, Emma. And we'll do one more actually, because I have got quite a few questions. So I'll just do one more on this topic. I'll go to Kate, if I may.
Okay, well, I think my problem is a global problem, but as an organisation that sells an awful lot of products, I would encourage people to think about where those products come from, whether that's your ice cream or your bottle of fizzy pop, and choose the most sustainable option. And I think we should all be putting pressure on national companies and organisations, global organisations, to improve their packaging, the way that they manufacture, because I have to buy Wall's ice cream because I need to sell it. But equally, unless they provide their goods in a sustainable way, it's very difficult for us, to make those commitments. So it's sort of a local, buy local, but also we all need to be putting our feet down and saying we're not going to put up with that anymore. Multinationals, please.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you, Tris. I know you want to come in, but the next question I've actually got is for you, if that's okay.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough.
So, in terms of this is around the sort of quality and maintenance of our brooks and streams as tributaries to the River Nen or River Nene, depending on where you are. So does the quality and maintenance have an impact on the quality of our rivers? So brooks and streams and tributaries have that impact on quality to our rivers? And if so, what do we as a council, but also those local landowners, need to do to ensure that we are undertaking our own riparian responsibilities?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question. And it's one that in my own catchment where I farm at the moment in the Pittsford, so we're directly linked to Pittsford Reservoir, all of our water from farm goes to Pittsford. So we know firsthand the problems that can be caused from even just a simple job like clearing out a ditch if it's blocked or a drain. Because as soon as you disturb the soil that is in that watercourse, you can release things that you wouldn't necessarily expect to release. For example, metaldehyde. People in the know will know that metaldehyde is an element of slug pellets, is incredibly damaging and very, very difficult for the water companies to remove from drinkable water. I think the rate at which it pollutes is about 1 slug pellet for an Olympic swimming pool amount of water. That's all it takes to pollute a watercourse. It's incredible. So it's very, very sensitive. And farmers often, you've got a block drain, get a digger or dig it out by hand. the soil then releases built up metaldehyde into the watercourse, and this is a huge problem. Anglian Water have taken really great steps to prevent this through schemes like Slug It Out, which is a scheme they've promoted in our area, where they pay the difference for farmers to be able to purchase a better product called ferric phosphate, which doesn't contain the metaldehyde, the problematic element. And that is one way of getting on top of the problem. But inevitably, unfortunately, when you're disturbing soil, you're always going to potentially contaminate the water that's running through it. So it's really about preventing those contaminants from getting into that soil around the ditch in the first place, right? So you mentioned about riparian tree planting, brilliant. You know, anything that's going to hold back water is ideal. So that's why a lot of the focus of stewardship in recent years has been about sort of strips that you can plant either side of your watercourses, like using highly rooted cover crops to take up that water and prevent it from entering the watercourse in the first place. It's one of the big challenges that we have, because obviously everybody wants to avoid flooding, but nobody wants to pollute watercourses. So yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22 sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope that fully answers the question.
Well, I think, and also to be fair, I think you were covering it as well in your video, actually, weren't you? You were showing some of the mitigations and activities that have been undertaken, hedgerow planting, tree planting, to slow that up. So I think there's lots we can do, but it's a challenge, isn't there? And as you say,
it's a balance. It's a balance. It's not
exactly.
about because if you're holding back water, I don't know sort of what aspect your question is asking the question, but from the member of the public's point of view, obviously holding back water can be problematic because it can cause more flooding for residential properties. So it's about slowing down the flow of water that's going through the brooks and into the rivers. So we use methods like tree planting or leaky woody dams that we can put in place to act as a bit of a water break. And those things are great because they don't actually stop the flow of water, so they're not causing flooding, but they do slow the flow. And that's really what we need to do, because we're having more of these rainfall events, a bit like today, or the last couple of days where we've had about 3 inches of rain in one day or something ridiculous. And, our drainage systems, obviously, they can't cope. So they're overwhelmed. It all goes into the brooks and rivers and then it floods. So slowing down that flow is really key.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tris. Really insightful response there. Thank you. Claire, you don't get off lightly. Got a question for your good self. This is around, partnership, I think, has been at the heart, as I've said already, of all that's happened. Questions come in about how citizens, the people of Northamptonshire can get involved, and whether that's through a dedicated citizens group that both brings a combination of expertise, a wider awareness raising, an educational piece, but also allaying people's fears on biodiversity, loss of habitats, etc. So just wanted to get your view on that, Claire.
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that myself and Oliver and others who sit on the local nature partnership have been actually thinking about this week. We had our local nature partnership meeting just the other day, and it's going to be really important. We really want to listen to those views, and that's not easy because every resident or everyone who works across the patch, we really want to encourage them to submit their views forward. So when we're starting to think about how we can create the local nature recovery strategy, we've been looking at having the idea of having working groups so that actually we can gather some really good collective ideas together to give everyone that opportunity to feed in. And I think that's probably the best way of doing it. It's going to take time and it's going to take energy to really listen to all those views and try and collaborate together to incorporate as many of those different ideas and solutions into the strategy. And I think maybe having little events or tagging on to other larger events where we can go and listen to people and local community groups' ideas and input is going to be really important. So yeah, maybe some of those pop-up events that might be happening hopefully sometime in the new year once we've got the regulations and guidance. But if anyone's out there who does want to sort of share their views now, please take my contact details, get in touch. And even if we don't have maybe the resource at the moment to collate them, I'd love to sort of capture people's contact details in a hope that we can start to sort of build that into how we create the strategy.
Yeah, and I think that awareness and understanding is growing, isn't it? Which is great. I think we've seen quite an acceleration of that, I think, in the last few years, and we're really pleased we've got a local school talking this afternoon in our third session. So, but I think the more that we can harness that energy and that awareness, and there will be pockets of expertise, won't there, in those communities that can help drive and do those small steps, as we've been saying, but actually make a big difference collectively, I think is key. One final question, which I'm probably going to pose to Kate, but others feel free to chip in, because it's not the easiest. But it's how people can get involved in a sustainable way, particularly when they don't have transport, their own transport to get involved. So just wondered whether any of you have considered that, and how people can look to get involved when they don't have their own transport. So I'll start with you, Kate, if I may, but then maybe seek the views of one other before we close. Kate?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and as a site that is quite difficult to get to, it is a topic that we discuss regularly. And actually, we had a conversation at a conference last week about ways to access green spaces, walking, cycling, and also by horse. But I think we're looking at ways to reach out to communities and to provide inspiration for groups to make a contribution in their own patch, I suppose, on their own patch. Also, I mean, we have to think about ways of bringing people to the site in groups. That means, they can access something that they wouldn't normally, but that requires funding. So, yeah, it's constantly in our minds, but a combination of better access routes to green spaces so that people can take themselves there, and an awareness of what local spaces there are that you can go to and get involved and do activities in, with an element of outreach, us going out, working with people in order to sort of give them a better understanding of the impact they can have on their own environment.
No, thanks, Kate.
I was just going to say, because it's coming on back of what Kate was saying there, managing a big country park at the sort of very end of the valley, very similar circumstances to Kate and Stannick Lakes, and I'm always surprised, given our proximity to the city centre of Peterborough, how many people still come to us in a car, and actually trying to better inform people of what those safe routes are into local spaces is hugely important, because a lot of people just aren't aware of what those are for very good reasons. And I think one thing that's really sort of highlighted for me, and where Kate touched on, sort of reaching out and sort of outreaching into local communities rather than relying on them necessarily coming to us, but also using different forms of media to do that. So I'm just about to have a delivery at the door. No, here we go. There's always going to be one, isn't there? But I think the new technologies, we've got this fantastic conference taking place now where you can engage from your living room effectively. And I know we did a number of events during lockdown that we were typically delivered face to face to the public, but we weren't able to do that. So, we did live streams of some of our rangers going around and doing workshop sessions that they would typically have done with people face to face. And so I think there's some opportunity there as well.
Yeah. And I'll let Emma come in and have the final word before I wrap things up. Emma?
Thanks, George. I have to echo, own patch is definitely a thing. And again, with the Eyes Valley, there's lots of opportunities, and it's about working with our local communities in their own patch to improve their own patch. But I also wanted to mention the Greenway, the North Northamptonshire Greenway, that we have an aspiration for. Our partner organisations and the council itself working very, very hard to create a network of routes that are easily accessible for pedestrian or for walking, cycling and wheeling, I said earlier on, and I stick by it. And that will allow people to look at sustainable modes of transport, really, to get to different places. But when it comes to getting hands-on involved, look at where you are and think about how you can improve it.
Thanks. And I think Tris, I thought you were having the last word, Emma, but I think Tris wants to just come in. I'm sure no more than 30 seconds, Tris.
No, I'll keep it very quick. I would like to go back to Oliver's really interesting presentation, and there was a cartoon that he had there of, I think it's a McKay cartoon of the waves, and by far and away the biggest wave, and I'm completely agreeing with this, is the biodiversity crisis, right? And that's something everybody can shape. If you can't get out and about, then you look at your daily life, right? You look at things you do on a day-to-day basis and think about the impact those are likely to have. And if you can minimize those, great. If everybody did that, we'd be well on the way to solving the problem. So it's just lots of little things, I think it's all about.
Great. No, thanks, Tris. And thank you to you all for partaking in that. It's always, this is done live, so the colleagues on screen don't know what questions they're going to get posed. So well done. So a big thank you to Emma, Tris, Claire, Kate, and Oliver for taking us through some really fascinating presentations over the last 90 minutes or so. That concludes our second session. We will be taking a small break, and we'll be starting our third and final session focused on celebrating and nurturing our environment. That will start at 2 o'clock. But in the meantime, I'll say thank you very much and hope to see you all again at 2 for our third session. Thanks, everyone.